Hi guys, today I would like to handle a session on types of working capital and estimating the working capital requirements in a business. Let's look into the types of working capital. Basically, the working capital are of two types. The first one is known as permanent working capital or fixed working capital, and second one is known as fluctuating or variable working capital. What is the difference between these two? Let's look into that. And permanent working capital means a minimum amount of working capital that is needed to carry out the business. So in all organization, you need to have such and such minimum amount of working capital to run the business. You need minimum amount of debtors, minimum amount of stock, minimum amount of cash to carry out the business. That is known as permanent or fixed working capital of the business. And what's fluctuating working capital? The working capital that always change according to the changes in the demand. If there is peak season, you need to have more working capital. If there is off season, you need only less working capital. So according to the changes in the production and sales, the working capital will also fluctuate and change, which is known as variable working capital. So there are two types of working capital. The first one is fixed working capital. You need to have minimum amount of working capital to run the business. That is known as fixed working capital. And the working capital that always change according to the changes in the level of activities, that is known as fluctuating working capital or variable working capital. Let's look into the determinants of working capital in an organization. It's purely based on one factor, which is known as nature of business. If you are doing some kind of trade business, you need to have finished product. And if you are doing some manufacturing business, you want to have raw material, work in process, finished product, debtors, and all these things is needed for a manufacturing business. So it all depends upon what kind of business you are doing. In a service business, you don't need more working capital, but in a manufacturing business, you want to make the product. For making the product, you need to have more raw material. And once you manufacture the product, then you will sell the product on credit basis to the customers, which is creating debtors. Then again, you need to have more cash in your hand also for running the business. So in a manufacturing business, you need more working capital. But in other business, you need only less working capital. Then the second factor is known as market and demand. If there is more demand for the product, then naturally you want to manufacture more and more product. Your production should increase. If you want to increase your production, you want to buy more raw materials and you need more cash in your hand to meet all these requirements. So you need to have more working capital when the demand is increasing. That is the second most important factor that determining the working capital in a business. And third one is technology. The firms can follow different technologies. One is, the manual technology, and second one is semi-automated technology, and third one is fully automated technology. Suppose if the organization is implementing fully automated technology, then they can manufacture the products very fastly with the minimum working capital in the business. But if they are following some semi-automated technology to manufacture the product, they should carry more cash, they should carry more inventories. So they need to have more working capital to run the business. That is the third factor, technology. What kind of technology used by that organization? And the next one is credit policy. What kind of credit policy followed by that organization for allowing the credit to the customers? Is it a liberal policy or aggressive policy? If the company is following a liberal policy for allowing the credit to the customers, say for example 90 days credit, 120 days credit allowing to the customers, then one item in the balance sheet will increase, which is known as debtors. Debtors will increase. If there is more debtors, then the company need more working capital. So the credit policy will also affect on the working capital of the business. Then the next one is operating efficiency. What does it mean? So operating efficiency is nothing but you can manufacture the product very fastly. You can collect the cash very quickly from the customers. You are doing the things very fastly, which is known as operating efficiency. So if you have more operating efficiency, then you need only less working capital. Your operating efficiency is very less, then you need to have more working capital to meet all your day-to-day requirements of the business. That is the next factor that determining the working capital of a business. And the next one is inflation. You know that inflation means general increase in the price level of the commodities in the market is known as inflation. If there is more inflation, what happens? The prices of the commodities will increase. Then you want to spend more and more amount on the inventories. Then you need to have more working capital to run the business. So all these factors are determining the working capital in a business. Whether you need more working capital or less working capital, it all based on these factors. Let's look into the issues that faced by the financial managers in managing the working capital in the organization. The most important issue is to determine the optimum level of current assets. What does it mean, optimum level of current assets? It's known as, you should not invest more amount on working capital. You should not invest less amount on working capital. You must invest the exact amount of working capital to run the business, which has to be identified. That is the most critical issue that faced by the financial managers in managing the working capital of the business. And the next one is current asset to fixed asset. Suppose if an engineering company invests huge amount of money on the machinery, and they need to have certain proportion of current assets to be invested as a percentage on the fixed asset for managing the working capital of the business. There must be a certain ratio between the current asset to fixed asset for managing the working capital has to be identified. So why these things are doing? It's only for managing the liquidity with profitability of the business. Suppose if the profits are increasing, but you are not carrying enough liquid assets and you are not able to meet the short-term requirements of the company, that's very dangerous. But at the same time, you are investing huge amount of money on debtors, cash, inventory, then you are not able to increase your profit level of the business, which is also very dangerous. So you want to manage both of these things, liquidity versus profitability, which is one of the issues faced by the working capital managers or the finance managers in the organization. Let's look into the types of estimation of working capital requirements in the business. So basically there are three methods that followed by the managers to estimate the working capital in a business. And the first one is known as current asset holding period or operating cycle method. You know that what is operating cycle? Operating cycle is known as the total time taken for converting the raw materials into finished product and finished products into debtors, and finally how many days actually taken for all these activities, which is known as the operating cycle of the business. So this operating cycle is very lengthy, then you need more working capital. So based on operating cycle concept, you can estimate the working capital of the business. That is the first method of estimating working capital. Second method is known as ratio of sales. A certain percentage charged on the sales and that will be kept as working capital to run the business. That is known as ratio of sales. Usually the FMCG companies are following this method. FMCG companies managers will estimate the sales for the next year, and if it is 25 lakh rupees and 25 lakh rupees, 30% of the 25 lakh rupees will keep as working capital in the business. That is known as ratio of sales. And next one is known as ratio of fixed investment. So usually in the engineering companies, the managers will invest huge amount of money on the fixed assets. A certain percentage on the fixed assets must kept as working capital to meet the day-to-day requirements of the business. That is another method that followed by the companies. So there are three methods. One is known as operating cycle. There are organizations who need more and more time to manufacture the product, who need more time to collect the cash from the customers. Such kind of organization must follow this method for estimating the working capital of the business. And the sales are actually fluctuating. Sales are always fluctuating, which is not predictable in nature. And sales is one of the most important determinant of the working capital in some kind of business. These businesses should follow this method, ratio sales method. Especially the engineering companies and all must follow another method. That method is known as ratio fixed asset or fixed investment method. So these are the three methods of estimating working capital. Then how you can meet this working capital, from where you can obtain the money to meet the working capital? That's a big question in the working capital management. So basically there are two financing methods. One is known as long-term financing and second one is known as short-term financing. You know that how you can borrow the money. Long-term sources are available. Term loan is available. Issuing debentures is available, issuing equity shares, and you can obtain the money. These are basically known as the long-term sources of financing to meet the working capital of the business. And what is short-term source of financing? A lot of short-term loans are available, but at the same time, you can depend on the money market instruments for raising the funds from the public. Commercial paper, certificate of deposit, money market mutual fund, and a lot of short-term instruments are available in the money market, and all these money market instruments are used for raising the funds from the public using short-term methods. So these are the two methods, short-term and long-term methods for financing the working capital. So basically there are three types of financing policies are actually used in working capital management. The first one is known as matching working capital financing policy. What's the meaning of that? Short-term assets are matching with short-term liabilities, and long-term assets are matching with long-term liabilities. In other words, what we can say, if you want to buy a material worth of 100 rupees, you borrow 100 rupees short-term on a short-term basis and buy that material. That's known as matching policy, which is known as issuing some money market instruments and raising short-term loan and use that money for meeting the working capital. If you issue debentures, equity shares, and raise that long-term fund and use that fund to buy the fixed assets, that policy is known as matching policy. Then the next one is known as conservative policy. This is a policy adopted by the people who have a lot of fear in their minds. So especially the finance managers with a lot of fear follow this policy, conservative policy. What is this policy? The finance manager will issue the long-term instruments in the market and they will raise the funds by way of issuing equity shares and debentures, and they obtain the money, and this money is used for buying the fixed assets as well as for buying the current assets, like buying the materials and all. To meet the short-term requirements of the business, the managers are using the long-term money. That is known as conservative policy. And the third one is aggressive policy. You depend on all short-term instruments for raising the fund and use that money for meeting the working capital as well as for meeting the long-term requirements of the business. That is known as buying the fixed assets as well as buying the materials. Both are done with the short-term financial instruments that issued in the market. That is known as aggressive policy. So the managers who follow aggressive policy are taking more risk. Managers who follow conservative policy are not taking risk. These are the types of working capital financing policy. Thank you. Thank you all.